24 in the series where I am programming an NES game live tonight and from scratch. So let's get started here. We've got the live stream going, so hopefully people will pop in and say hello and maybe ask some questions. But regardless, we will code along like we always do. And in the last episode, what we were doing was we were working on getting this ship here to spawn in the right way with the appropriate amount of spacing. Be forewarned, there will be dog barking in the background as when my wife gets home, so look for that. So we wanted to make it so that when the enemy ships spawn, they spawn with the appropriate amount of spacing, and that we get the collisions working and everything with this, and we got that. But the thing we noticed was there are a couple of problems with this approach. The first problem with this approach is that if I shoot the first bad guy, which I missed, so let's rewind here and try that again now that I actually remember where they're coming out. If I shoot the first one, you see it only spawns 2, and the problem with that is that there are supposed to be 3. So if I don't shoot the first one, well, there are 3 now. So that's because the first one is the one that's in control of the spawning behavior, and that's no good. And then the second problem is that we want to track the grouping of our little enemies there, and because we're using the first one to spawn, the rest of them, we have no sort of permanent means of tracking that information that is what I would say reliable or efficient. We could come up with all sort of convoluted lists that we could use to track where the groups are, and have group slots in memory that we could, dynamically choose and fill. But ultimately, that's kind of dumb, because we could just as easily make an object that's responsible for the spawning of the enemy ships, and have that not only be responsible for the spawning, but also keep track of, have a means of keeping track of when the ships get destroyed. So it's going to take a little bit of background work here, because right now we track these enemies based on their placement on the map here, and we don't have any way of placing something that spawns new objects on screen that isn't itself a sprite. So thinking about this, what I wanted to do is create an object we could place, where we could use these custom properties to define what kind of object it spawns, and how many, and what the spacing is between them, because that's ultimately, I think, the most scalable approach for the game, and will give us the ability to reuse that object in a reasonable way, right? Which is always what we want to do. We want to make sure that we are designing something that could be reused as much as possible, not to the detriment of performance, obviously, since the CPU is not super powerful and can't handle, layers and layers of abstraction. But yeah, let's see what we can do here. So I made this little launch PNG thing here. I'm going to create a tile set out of it, and it's not even going to be a tile set. It's just going to be it's going to just be a tile, really. And I'm just going to call it launch. Excuse me. And in this case, the tile set size is just going to be 8 by 8.
So let's save that. In tile set says launch TSX. There it is. It's transparent, so you can't really see it here, but you should be able to see it pretty well on the map. Now, if I recall correctly, there is a way to create object types. The only reason I would want to do something like that is that it will facilitate the creating of the custom properties that we will need. Now, I don't know that I want to spend too much time on trying to figure this out. We might just start with the custom properties and then sort of backtrack onto it once we make some progress, because it may be faster to do that. I don't know. It's a tile set. Tile set properties. So could we just embed it in the tile set? Or are these the, let's see. If I add, so let's go with, say it's sprite type. And it's going to be a string because we're going to convert it internally to in the export tool to know which sprite we're talking about. Spawn count. So how many things are we actually spawning? And then spawn timer, and that is also an integer. Although I don't know if it's possible to do. No, okay, it's not possible to be more specific about that data type. It is an integer. Okay, so now that we have that defined, let's add the external tile set to that, and that is the launch. And I should be able to put that. I can put that right there. And move it around, but it doesn't have my custom properties on it, so that didn't exactly work the way that I was hoping. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete those from the tile set itself, because that is not what I thought it was. Predefining properties. Usually, to make predefined properties show up in the properties view, all you need to do is enter the name of the type in the built-in type property. Typed tiles. So, object types editor. Thought I remembered seeing something about that, so let's see if we can find where the objects type editor is. So there's nothing. View object type editor. There it is. Let's call this a launch type. And then see, what did we say? There was sprite, which is a string, and then there's spawn. Well, just keep it short. We'll say there's count, which is an integer, and then there's frame delay, which is also. You know, I hesitate to use frame delay because if we want to make this PAL compatible, we would want to convert. We would want to store this in either seconds or milliseconds and convert over to the number of frames based on if it's PAL or NTSC, 50 or 60 frames per second respectively. So let's call that delay millisecond. It's delay, that's in milliseconds. So that's that. Okay, cool. All right, it just added it. So
we want it to spawn the little bit. We want it to spawn 3, and we want the delay to be, let's say, half a second, so 500 milliseconds. Whether or not that delay gets pre-computed by the export and we have to export PAL and NTSC separately or not, I don't know what I want to do right now. I think right now what we'll do is we will export the PAL and NTSC content separately, and that'll have to be good enough. I'm not crazy about. I thought this would be subtle enough that it would stand out, but also not be obnoxious. But I think I want it to be obnoxious so that I can actually see it better. We will make sure that we do not care about the colors that are used. I mean, in fact, what we may want to do, I think maybe I'm going to choose a palette that has colors that we wouldn't necessarily be able to put on the NES, just so on the tiled map we have some better visibility here. So let's do that. Let's take this really, really bright color, and we'll just fill that. And then I just want these to stand out. Is really what I want. Oh wow, so that picked up the change immediately. Oh, that's cool. So that means that we'd be able to see that while we play around with it. Let's I know this is hideous. It's purely a programming thing that we're going to see on the map, but we are not going to see in the game. So I apologize in advance if I'm offending your artistic sensibilities. Clearly, I have none. That might be a little too over the top, even for programmer art. Let's just leave that for now. So that's going to be our spawn point. You can see that it says it spawns a little bit with a delay of 500 seconds per spawn with 3 items that we're going to spawn, 3 instances. So let's get rid of this. Then what we have to do, if you recall, is in our project, we... this is not the one. Where is it? We want to include this sprite this way because we are not spawning just a single instance of it. We are spawning it from the launch, so it needs to be included in that. I guess we don't really need this tile set in here then anymore. I don't know if this is better or worse than how we were doing it before, but we'll see. So far, I think this is okay. I should have left this alone and had it like a little rounded. Okay. Ultimately, what that looks like doesn't really matter, like I said before. All right, so we've got this. Let's export this as the JSON file for the export tool. Bearing in mind that, of course, we have to make sure that we ignore the draw entities code that the tool generates because it is no good. All right. So that's being exported, or will be exported once we run this, but we're going to have to make some changes. Actually, I need to look at what the map content now looks like to see I don't need this open right now. Where is my folder at? Let's open this up. Fine, you can do that. I don't care. That shouldn't take too long. Draw entities, except for that, which is annoying. I wish Microsoft would have taken a cue from Apple on that one and just popped up a normal window that showed that you needed to authenticate rather than this huge overlay on the screen, totally interrupting anything you're doing. All right, so is that going to relaunch? I'd like to be able to look at my files, please. And map 1 is here. Anytime you're ready. Thank you. I don't want to look at the release notes. I want to look at the file. Still doing that. That's annoying. Okay. So now we have the enemies layer. It is a launch type. So we can start looking at that. We can start looking at this launch type to determine if it's a thing that we actually need to input into the map as an enemy, or if it has to be encoded a little bit different. I don't know how we would want to encode this. I feel like on the one hand it would be easy to have every enemy, whether it's a launch point or not, or a spawn point, I guess, or not, be spawned from an object that looks the same regardless. But at the same point, that's wasteful. It wastes bytes. We might want to include in the enemy export process the type of thing it is, so that we know in our assembler code whether or not to expect those details. Where is the export code for the enemies? That's the palette code export map. Let's see. So that's there. F12 into that. Our palettes, it's up higher. In the map itself, there is the list of enemies in sorted order, so that when we're scrolling through the map, we don't have to compare against every enemy that we potentially could draw on the map, but rather just the next one to see if it should be drawn or not, because if that one shouldn't be drawn, then the next one in line definitely shouldn't be drawn either. Let's see. Where is that? That's the map. And this is some buffer information about the map. These are palette type things. Collisions. Hardcode the sprite palette lookups. That's the map content. I thought we... Oh, here. These are the map objects. So these would be the enemies. So right now we're... Let's see. So the exported ID, the X, and the Y. So we could add an additional type. If we have X and Y, and then if type is spawn launch, then we have 3 more bytes for sprite type, count, and delay between spawn, right? And then to do the bonuses where you're getting power-ups for deleting. I keep saying that, and destroying is, I think, what I mean to say, but then my programmer brain takes over, and it's like, you're deleting it from memory. When you delete all three, I said it again, when you destroy all three in the group, it should spawn some sort of bonus item or something to that effect, and so this will make it easier to keep track of, because this thing will be an actual entity in memory that will be responsible for keeping track of that, rather than the sprites themselves that are the enemies on the map, which have other things they need to be keeping track of. Okay, so now we need to load the map a little bit differently, because we've got these properties that we want to look at that we're not looking at right now. So object group. So that is our enemy list there. I'm trying to think if there's any scenario that we'd have. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be single enemies that get spawned that have, no grouping. But shmups are pretty group heavy. You're generally, unless it's like a big enemy, like a boss type or mini boss type enemy, my recollection is that you're generally getting waves of enemies in every shmup I've ever played. Actually just got finally delivered Battle Garega, the limited run box for that game. I've heard that game is insanely difficult, but I wanted to watch the interview with them too on Blu-ray, because it just sounded like it would be cool to watch. I know they put it on YouTube, but I wanted to be able to watch it on a bigger screen than I have on my phone or computer, and so I'm looking forward to watching that and playing that game. Alright, so plus I just like physical media. I have too many cartridges and discs and all sorts of things that are taking up a lot of room. Alright, so let's just go with the idea that there are going to be scenarios where we have enemies that are not necessarily these launch points. Hey, Banchaku, how's it going? Good to see you on the stream here. Let's take a look. Let's get the property. It's called type. We're just doing exactly the same thing we're doing in the other properties that we are interested in looking at here. Yeah, I'm busy too, as I mentioned on Twitter a couple times. Things have been pretty crazy at work, and I've been oh, see, that's a holdover from work, because I've been doing some C++ stuff, which is unusual for me these days, unfortunately, because I do like C and C++, but was totally in that world again, and it's amazing how, I guess because I did it for so many years, my muscle memory for all that stuff came back real quick, and felt good to be programming on that stuff again, but lots of late nights and too many things going on. So let's see. So we're getting this type, and we're going to check to see if the type is launch. And if it is launched, then we got to get the properties, because we want to look at these properties and see. I assume we're going to have different types, so we'll need to record potentially different properties. But for now, we should be okay with just putting these in here. So let's see, the map object. Right now it just has a position and an ID. So let's add our count, our delay, the delay, let's say that this is going to be, if this is milliseconds and we can only have 32,000 seconds, that's 32,000 milliseconds, that's 32 seconds, that's probably okay. It's UN16, just want to make a note of that, because I'm sure I will forget at some point. And then our sprite. And the sprite will be the name of the sprite that is to be spawned, and that'll get replaced with an actual sprite ID based on how the project is loaded. Now I know, so we have this map meta tile structure. Okay, so that has the export ID, that is the GID. Okay, that's the mapping between the export and the GID. So let's put in here that's the sprite ID that gets loaded when after the map is read and consolidated down and all that other good stuff. So all right, so if we get the type here properly, I don't know what happens with a normal sprite that we were adding, if that actually doesn't have a type or not. Let's double check that, because I don't want to implement this and not have that right. So there it is there. One thing I was messing around with this week, because I know I've gotten complaints about this in the past, so feel free to comment about this in either the stream or in the recording, below the recording and on YouTube in the description, sorry, in the comments section. I know the volume of the audio has been a problem at times, where people are saying that they are not happy with the audio volume, and part of that I think is because I don't know if it's my audio input, because I have the audio turned up pretty much all the way, and the problem with that with the microphone is that makes there be a lot of background noise. Now I can talk this way into the microphone real close, and then you wouldn't have the noise, but then I've got to have a microphone in my face, which I prefer not to do, other than when, you know, talking to people, like when we had OleSchool Gamer, Wiggy on here the other day, and we're just chatting. So let's take a look at this here. So the type is empty. Okay, so it does have a type. All right, that's what I wanted to confirm. So let's get rid of that. Never had an issue about the volume. All right, well, I know, especially in some of the earlier videos, it was an issue, and I had reposted some of the some of those videos where people commented about it, you know, as like a, if it was episode 7, as a 7.1 that you could link to hear it with louder audio, but I don't know. I'm sort of all over the place in terms of I'd been thinking about getting a lapel mic to have just right here on my shirt, so that you could pick up the audio better. But they're expensive. I didn't really want to spend, you know, $200 or $300 on something like that. These mics that I have are pretty good. They're condenser mics. They're meant more for audio recording, like for instruments and vocals, where they are going to be right up in front of your face. But yeah, I prefer faraway voice. Seems more natural to me, maybe because I'm new at this. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of torn because I know I like to listen to a lot of YouTube things sort of in the background, and I know that people then have to turn that up because they're not really focused on it, so it's got to be slightly louder for them to pay attention to. But then if it auto plays another video, you know, by say a bigger channel where they're, you know, where they're editing their videos and boosting their audio channels, then those channels are quite loud. So I don't know. I was messing around with FFmpeg. It does have the ability to normalize audio for you, and it seemed to work pretty well. It's dynamic, so it adjusts it based on the time frame that you're, you know, periods of time throughout the video, so that it's never too loud or only appropriately loud in the loudest parts of the video. Right, so if it's a launch type, we got to get the properties of this thing. I just got to remember. Get property index is right. Okay, so what I want to do now is the same thing as here. So if get property index, JSON code, tokens, token index, num tokens minus token index, object, no, sorry, properties. I also like to listen to younger people love it louder. Always been like that. That's true. I mean, whether it's music or otherwise. But you know, I mean, I don't mind if it needs to be louder to make it, you know, work for people. I'm fine with that. Or maybe I just need a different audio interface that sends the volume in louder. But I mean, based on what I'm seeing here, the microphone volume is, I mean, it's hitting about -10 decibels according to the VU meter on OBS, and that seems like that should be sufficient. But then I listened back to it, and it's way softer compared to other things. And again, I think some of that is down to they normalize their audio so that it's always at, you know, -4. Or something like that. You know, you look at their audio and it's going to be a more consistent volume overall, whereas I'm just sitting here talking to you guys. So anyway, figured I'd bring that up. So if we can't get the properties, we exit with error. Wow, I keep doing that.
string n comp. No, what is it? Whatever. All right, we'll just do a direct string comparison. It's a defined type, so that's all right. I was doing the case insensitive compare, but doesn't really matter. All right, so we get the we have the property token index now, and once we have that, how does this work? We add that to the token index. And then we check the type. We got to make sure that it is an array, which is fine. And then we have the size, which is our count of properties. Okay. All right, so that's straightforward enough. I've said this before. I'll say it again. This is definitely one of those areas where having something a little bit more structured with the way that it parses the JSON would be preferable to this. Just conceptually, this is less than ideal at times, but it is what it is. Maybe at some point we can rewrite this to use something a little bit more straightforward. How much of the game progress since the last few weeks, months I didn't watch? I mean, we're at a point where, I mean, to be fair, the last 3 weeks I really, other than I had, did I do an episode at the end of last week? I did an episode and I did one Monday. I'm doing this one today. Before that, it had been about 3 weeks since I had done one because I was traveling and then under some pretty heavy deadlines that were preventing me from continuing. Or no, it was two and a half weeks. So I don't know that you missed all that much. Looks like next week we'll do a live stream of Jonathon and I revisiting NES debugging in Messen, which hopefully people will like, because I think that's a pretty useful skill for people to at least get some direct exposure to. I know I use the debugger a lot, but to actually talk about why I do the things I do and how I do them and stuff like that is, I think, important, because using the debugger effectively is important. There's a lot of time that can be wasted if you are dealing with a problem and you don't have a debugger to assist you in seeing what is actually going on. That said, you know, I talked to Bo and Kevin about this when they were on, and they don't generally use, I mean, I don't think they use the debugger at all for their troubleshooting. So obviously not required. I know, you know, when I was just getting started out, like we all were, I think this is what happens when you try to talk and replicate code at the same time. You know, used a lot of print statements, but I think it's definitely not a viable option to do that on the NES, given the limitations of the NES and its ability to output things. I mean, you could draw text on the screen, but not generally what I would want to do in a situation like this. Advanced token index, tokens, token index. I gotta remember. I don't remember if that's the right way to get us through. I think it is, but let's get to this part here in the code when we do our export, and then we'll fix that problem if it's even a problem. I found yesterday that you can debug to some degree C code too. Is that in Messen, or is that in something else in CC65? Oh, that's cool. I didn't know it had C support. You know, I want to see. It's possible for me to. I want to increase the time that the chat stays up a little bit. I don't generally have a huge number of people on the chat, and it would be nice to keep that text up a little bit longer. Now it's going to make me log in. All right, I'll do that later. Source view option, and you can see all your files. That's quite useful. Yeah, no, that's really cool. I didn't realize it had C support as well. I'll have to, you know, I on the one hand, I do enjoy doing this stuff in assembly, but sometimes I'm really jealous of the people who decided to start with C. Just because I know that there'd be, I mean, you're dealing with other issues still, and it doesn't change the technical challenges of working on the NES, but at the same point, you know, some of the things that we were dealing with in the assembler code probably would have been simplified a little bit if this was C. But I mean, it's fine. I very rarely think I find myself in a situation where I'm slowed down a lot by using assembler. At this point, especially. C is full of bugs, so I may at a later stage do more ASM. Is it C is full of bugs, or is it just that it's easy to introduce bugs in C? Why did this not trigger my breakpoint? What did I do wrong? Is it because I am looking at... Do they have to be in order? X, Y, GID, type. Just type. So what's the deal with that? Oh, it got the type. So get property value as string. That's weird. The compiler sometimes doesn't create the ASM code appropriately, and you have strange bugs. Oh, well that... okay, that I could see that being a problem. Yeah, because it's, you know, it's one thing that you wrote bad code and you have bugs yourself, but writing code and then it not working, even though the C code is appropriate, but has the compiler can't compile properly. That's a whole different level of driving you crazy. I remember, I'm not sure why he was doing it, but a friend of mine was
working on something with OpenWRT, I believe it was, and he discovered a bug in the compiler that compiled down to the chipset for the router, and it was breaking his code. And he said he wasted a bunch of time trying to track that down. Get property indexes RC equals 0. Get token index. What's the deal? Why are you... Is this the opposite of all my other... Okay. Oh, yeah. I'm just not paying attention. It's because I'm talking to you guys. That's what it is. I'm talking and I'm not paying attention, and I'm not comparing it against the right thing in my if statement. So yeah. It's maybe a special edge case, but when it happens, you start doubting yourself first, which is what you should do. So, yeah. I mean, it's very rare that I've had a situation where the compiler, well, in larger development environments, let's say, in larger development environments, it's very rare that you find the development tool is generating bad low-level code, whatever that is. If it's common language runtime in the C# world, or x86 if it's compiling to native or whatever, that is a very rare occurrence. And so, oops, this is a bug. So when it does happen, it's a pretty big deal. Now, in the case of the larger development environments, I rarely find that that's a problem, but we have, in this one tool that we use at work, I've run into situations where the compiler compiles the code, but does not obey proper orders of operation. So, you have to force things to be evaluated properly by adding parentheses, which, I sort of, out of paranoia, tend to do anyway, but that can backfire on you if you're not careful. And thankfully, those problems have mostly gone away with the latest versions, or the newish versions of it. But in the earlier ones, it was a giant problem because we ran into it a few times. And talk about doubting yourself in a situation like that, where the tool is designed to be something that is meant for meant to be used by people who are not necessarily low-level programmers, because it's sort of like a VB scripting tool. Let's see. That looks good. That looks like that actually did what it was supposed to. Tokens, token index. Just make sure that I'm looking at the right object here. So that's the object, and then the next thing in it is a string. That's the start and the end, and then what's the next thing in that? That's another string, so that's some sort of property. So after that object, we have this, and well, oh, it could be this thingy. No, it would be an object. So that was the array, so that's a string. Well, I have to look to see if that actually... Well, we're actually also done with the map at that point. Let's add another object to make sure that it traverses properly with that change, because with one object, Seems like it's fine, but there are always, you know, cases that you want to test, right? Like, so when you're working on something, you want to test what happens if there are no return values, if there's a lot of return values, if there's just one return value, because those are the cases you're not always thinking about. At least I've seen. You know, it's like you're usually thinking like, I'm going to return a handful of something, and so then the edge cases of like, I didn't actually get anything, or I only got one, or I got 20,000 are missed, and then you end up with a problem. Usually because a customer found it, and that's bad. Did this not export, or did Visual Studio Code not update? We have enemies, and oh, it's here. Why didn't it get the type? Oh, because, okay, you know what? That's fine. Let's leave the type. Excuse me, we'll test both scenarios. We'll test if it's a launch and then a normal one, a non-launch item, and then we will, after that, test a series of launch objects. I was hoping the coffee would carry me through this, but it's being up. I was up till 3 a.m. last night, and it's going to take more than caffeine, I think, to keep me pepped up for this. So we'll see how long I can manage to continue this. All right, so that was the first one. That was the second one. So let's see. Position is 26 hex. Let's go back to decimal. 38. 38. That is the same guy. Where are my objects? Map. I minus 1. Right, so we're looping. So that's a problem. Or, sorry, we're not advancing. So before I added this, we were just calling this, let's see, we were just calling advanced token index based on the tokens and the token index. I guess because we're at the property array. Well, we're not traversing the properties, so that probably doesn't help us either. So we should probably do that. Let's just traverse them. We don't have to actually do anything with them. But let's see. So we are... If we have the objects, we are traversing this array of objects. So then from there, based on the type, we get the properties array. Increment by the property token index. And then we get our count, which is 3. And then oh, I see. So for each of those, we want to do the advanced token index. That's what we're missing. And then that should be, at the end of that, we should do the same thing, because then we're done with that property, and then finally we're back at the end of the object. I think that's right. So let's go back and look here. Hope everybody's having a good week, even if it's busy. It's summer here in the US is winding down. We had gotten some cold weather here in New York just before yesterday it got hot again. But it was feeling like fall for a few days, which was nice after all the hot, humid weather we had been getting here. All right, so let's see what we're at here. Yeah, so I think we're advancing it too much because it is... Probably don't need to do it at the end of this because we are advancing within this loop. And if this is any indication, that should be enough. It's kind of what I thought, but I don't know. I gotta look. I gotta step through it and check because this part of the code is a little bit gnarly. All right, so we're just traversing through this again. All right, so 38,572, that's right. Let's make sure that we get the property. Now we don't get the property again. So why? Token index, tokens, token index. That is a string. That is also a string. Are we too far? I'm trying to figure out where we're going wrong, because we have the object, we're iterating, we're finding all the properties here, we're iterating through the object. So what it's doing is after we get these individual values, then we call the, where is Visual Studio? We call advanced token index to skip to this next object. But before we're doing that now, we're getting the properties, and we have the array, and so we're iterating through each of these. Let's I'm curious to see if we actually get a meaningful value here. Get property. Why are we not typing? Get property value. No, get property. As int 16. JavaScript code, tokens, token index. Tokens minus token index. And let's just get the first one. Let's get delay, actually, because I want something a little bit more interesting to retrieve. We need our actual map objects. Why are you not a map object? Delay, and that's, yep. Okay, so we should get 500 there. And I know it is going to complain. I do not care that it is a unsigned value under the circumstances. This should be that. And let's see what we get here when we retrieve this value. Oh, it didn't create my breakpoint. Oh, it doesn't matter because it didn't compile. What's the problem? uint16 pointer is incompatible with type int16. Oh, right. I casted it from what it is to what it is instead of what it needed to be. So let's take a look at that. Oh, it didn't work. Why? So we have the array. Is it because... Well, that's interesting. So there is a backward step, isn't there? Or am I imagining that? I know there is in Messen. Thought there was a... Well, doesn't matter. Let's go back. Let's go back a few lines and restart here. So the type... oh, well, I'm doing... Oh, you know what? I didn't realize that that was token index -3. So this is an array. So that's fine. That's the size, which is 3. We increment. Oh, okay, it is an object. Okay. Which is the same thing we're doing here. So get property. Oh, this should be subtoken index, or no, property token index. And should it? No, because you know what we're adding. Well, are we adding? Yeah, we are adding it there. So token index is okay. Num tokens minus token index. Get property values in 16. Is this another? So if it returns a non-zero value, then it is an error. Let's just double check this because I need to confirm that. Okay. Get property value is string. Get property index. Property name is delay. Oh. No, it's not delay. That's the name of the thing. And I am dumb. I'm not dumb. I just made a silly mistake because, again, I am talking to you guys and not paying attention. This is like anytime you've ever tried to do anything, if you're a programmer, while you're on the phone with somebody and they're trying to have a meaningful conversation with you about something, and it's just extremely difficult to do because it's hard to program and think about something else at the same time. I mean, it's hard to have a conversation and do anything at the same time. Can't tell you the number of people who are always like, I can't code and talk at the same time. And clearly, neither can I sometimes. but I can stumble through it somehow a little bit. And this should be equal to 0. This will definitely work a little bit better, because now we will get the name and make an N16 called value, not an N17. It's not even a real thing. So we'll get the value of it. And we'll actually close the parentheses. And then if string compare prop name to delay, we will set the map object I delay to value. And then we'll do the same thing for the other two properties. Else if that, delay. What did I call the other ones? Delay, sprite, and count. Sprite and count. Ooh. That only works in 2 out of the 3 cases. We can get it as a string and then convert it. Get property value as string. Okay, so that gets us at a string, as a string, I mean, and then depending on the property name, we will do A to I. That is going to be the same, but we will put this here. That's that, and then this will be string and copy S, and this will be sprite, and that will be value. Actually, this is max file folder name. Value max file folder name. Great. So let's see how we've done. I think I'm going to wrap a little early. I know that these last few episodes have been relatively quick compared to some of the earlier streams, but I am running out of steam here. What? Oh. Yeah, and exactly. And then I'm doing dumb stuff like this, where that was an error condition, not a success condition. All right, so the prop name is count. And the value is 3. And so now we set the count to 3. Excellent. That's what we needed to do. So we got the name, that is delay, and we got the value, which will be the milliseconds, 500 milliseconds, and we set that value. Wunderbar. And then we have the sprite, we get that as a string, and then we just do our string copy over, and that is little bit, which is correct. And now we are done. And then we're going to advance. So I think the reason this is failing on us here is because we are not advancing to the end of the object and to the next object like we should have been. So let's do the following. Token index is what? It's a... I don't care about the value. I want to know what kind of type it is. It's an int. So once we're done here, we're going to set token index back to original token index. And then, what is this? This is if it's a launch type, which is the appropriate thing to be testing for. Okay, so I think that will get us back to where we need to be. Because we're hitting objects in the tokens, which is correct for all these properties. But then once we're done, we need to go back to where this all kind of, yep, token index is now an object. So now we're going to advance to the next object. And that should give us that new thing we put on the map for the purposes of testing. It is not a launch type, so we do not care about looking for additional properties. The X and Y are 205 and 569 respectively, and that is what we have. So now we are done with processing that object. We're going to sort the array. Yeah, there we go. So that's what we needed. So that's good. That's exactly where I wanted it to go. So that's yeah. Actually, before we declare victory and wrap for the evening, I need to try. And let's put some different values in here. 5 and 1,000, and we'll leave this the same because if the other two are good, then I think this will be fine anyway. All right, that's been exported, and now we have 2. So let's make sure this is working now. All right, so let's just get straight to the point here. Get rid of that breakpoint and that breakpoint. So map object I, sprite is a little bit, sprite ID is 0, GID is 3, delay is 500, count is 3. Okay, and then the next one, 1,000, and 5, and yes, okay, so that's working. So we're good there. So where we're at then, let's do this. Where we're at then for the remainder of this work, and we will, I think I want to keep going, but I'm also just, I'm kind of done right now. Where we're at right now is we're reading in these properties. So now when it comes time to do the export, we have the properties we need to be able to export the launch type object correctly. Where is that code that we were looking at before? Put the comments in to know exactly where. Here it is. So let's put a bookmark here so we can come back to it. The only other thing we didn't do, and that's actually easy to add, is for the map object type, we should put a little thing in here that will indicate whether it is a visible type or not, if it's one of the launch ones or not. So let's do this. So in the other code we were working on, we have this, and let's when we iterate through these objects, we should start by assuming that these are visible. Because until we see that type, it's a reasonable assumption that we are going to see this thing on the map. Now, if we see the type is this launch thing, do I like that? Should I call it spawn point or something? Maybe that's probably a better. I know I'm splitting hairs on this kind of thing, but I don't know. I like trying to get the naming right, because then it helps it make more sense later. And if you do it wrong, it creates confusion. Try not to agonize over it too much, because you can waste a lot of time on writing and rewriting things for naming purposes, but should at least try to get it right. All right, so that's our spawn point. If it becomes not visible, and then basically let's do this stuff here. Okay, so obviously a little bit more that needs to be done here to get this working, but it will get us away from hard coding these things into that first item in the group of enemies that we spawn, and then that will alleviate the problems that I was talking about earlier with the dependency on the first item and the tracking of that stuff in the first item. And also what it's going to solve, another thing that I didn't mention, but hopefully will be straightforward, is right now the X position is based on where this thing is, which will be a problem if we do something where we have it cut over, like you do in shmups. So we don't want these spawning over here or something because of the X, and we don't want to have to add we don't want to have to introduce additional bytes for remembering the original exposition. By having this spawn point be something that stays on the map, as long as it continues to exist on the screen and not get despawned when it hits the bottom of the screen, it will spawn these enemies and know the start position in order to spawn it correctly, track the grouping of the enemies in a way that we can count down when they're destroyed, and just will be a better way of handling all of that stuff. So, as always, thank you for watching this live stream, and you know, we'll make some more progress in the next few episodes once I am better rested and able to focus a little bit more on this. But as always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Twitter at Clearvis. I am also on Nintendo Age as Zelius. I'm on the Discord pretty frequently. Would keep trying to do these streams on a weekly basis, have a little bit more regularity to the streams than I've had in the past few weeks. Yeah, and that's it. If you have any questions, add comments to the video below, or, you know, I've been talking to a few people over email and Twitter, and even a couple of folks signed up for the Patreon, so thank you to those two fine people, and they've been asking, you know, reaching out and saying hi, and I appreciate that tremendously. You know, I try to be accessible to everybody, but you know, definitely appreciate the support there. And anyway, I'm rambling because I'm tired. So have a good night, have a great weekend, and see you Monday. Thanks for tuning into the stream. And we'll see you next week for debugging. All right, take care.